Before we can get started, we actually have to download Python from python.org. You can see the URL up here. And once we have Python installed on our machine, we can then go ahead and download Microsoft Visual Studio Code. At the time of this recording, the downloads for Python for Windows is 3.9.1. And if you're using a Mac, it's a different release. It looks like for Mac, it's also 3.9.1. But I'm using a Windows machine, so I'm going to do a lot of this, almost all of this in Windows. I've selected the Python button here, 3.9.1, and you can see down in the bottom left corner that it's already started to do the install. I'm now going to run this. And you can see if you're on a Windows machine, make sure that this little button down at the bottom that says Add Python 3.9 to Path, make sure that you actually do check that. And then go ahead and do the install and select Yes. You should get a message saying that your setup was successful. So I'm going to close that, and I'm going to go down to the bottom left corner, and I'm going to type in CMD, and that's your command prompt. So I'm going to click on that, and you can see it takes me to this directory. And the next thing I want to do is type in Python, Python. And you can see that it says Python 3.1 or 0.9.1. To exit this, we're going to press Control Z. Enter. If you're using a Mac, you can do Command and space, and that's going to open up your Spotlight terminal. Terminal in a Mac is just like your command prompt for Windows. One difference between Mac and Windows is that Mac comes with a default version of Python, which is Python 2. So if you were to just type in Python like I did for Windows, you would get an older version of Python 2. So in this case, inside your Mac, you should type in Python 3, and it'll look something like this, with no space. Type in Python 3. I'm going to type in Python again because I'm on a Windows machine, and you can see I'm back in my Python environment. And what you're seeing here is something called a Python interpreter. And this interpreter is where we will execute Python code. We can actually type in our Python code here. This is an interactive shell that we can use to have our Python code get executed. So for example, if I type in 1 + 1, I'm getting a result, which is 2. And what I just wrote there is something called an expression. Okay, it's not very different than mathematics. It's basically a mathematical expression. It's the same exact thing. But you can see here, by doing it in my command prompt, writing my expression under a Python shell, I can actually get an output. 1 + 1 is 2. Let's try another expression. Let's say that 3 is greater than 2. And the answer here is true. And to test this one step further, 2 is greater than 3. And we get false. We're going to talk more about Booleans in a future video. Now, suppose I wanted to type in 1 is greater than, and then I just hit enter. And you can see that it says there's a syntax error right here. That's invalid syntax. And that's because I've literally broken a coding equivalent to a grammatical error. Okay, so what I've done doesn't make any sense to Python. Looking for syntax errors, or actually working code for that matter, in this type of a environment is not very conducive to writing good code. Okay, this is, for all intents and purposes, just a platform that we can really test out that our Python is actually working. Although this is working Python, it's not an environment that we would normally want to work in. So what I'm going to do is actually go and get a code editor, something that is a lot more robust and organized and easier to write really, really outstanding code with. So this is where we're going to go, and in a few short moments, we're going to download and install Microsoft Visual Studio Code. In order to more successfully write our code, what we're going to do is look at two options. We actually have a code editor, and we've got something else called an IDE, which is an integrated development environment. And an IDE, what this allows us to do is things like debug, test. It has something called an IntelliSense, which is kind of a typical thing that many IDEs have. But we'll learn more about that when we start getting into the environments themselves. And for now, though, what we're going to do is we're going to use this Visual Studio Code. It is an editor, but what we're going to do is install a plugin which will convert Visual Studio Code into an actual IDE. But even in its plain old vanilla form, Visual Studio Code is a really great editor to do Python work in. And what we're going to do now is go over to code.visualstudio.com and download Visual Studio Code if you haven't done so already. Here in visualstudio.com, you can see the code editor defined, and you can do a download for Windows, or you drop down and you can do a download for Mac or Linux. So go ahead and do the download in the installation of that. Now that Visual Studio Code is open, what I want to do is go to File, Open Folder, and I want to navigate to where I'd like to save this. And I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it Hello World. And I'm going to open up that folder. And you can see now that I have this Hello World file open, and there's a welcome message from Visual Studio Code. I'm going to close that. You can see here with this icon, it looks like two file folders or sheets of paper. It's the Explorer. And what I've got is Hello World here, and I have a couple of different icons, one called a new file, new folder, refresh Explorer, and collapse folders in Explorer. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to type on new file, and it's going to be called app.py. And py is the Python extension, and hit enter. All of my Python code should have that .py extension. Now I'm going to close my Explorer by selecting this icon again. And now you can see we're ready to start using our editor. The first thing I want to do is call a built-in function, and it's going to be the print function. And so I want you to think of these functions as all the little functionality that you have, let's say, in a printer. Every time you press a button or you actually hit the print button, it actually does something. So that's a standard pre-built little block of code that exists inside of Python already. It's actually in the library, and we can actually go in and use these predefined little functions. But don't worry, we're going to actually create our own functions in the future. But for now, just understand that we have the ability to call these pre-existing functions that are part of the Python library. I've gone ahead and enlarged my screen, or I've zoomed in. But what I really want to do now is I want to actually call that print function. It's exactly what it says. So print. Okay, and you can see that the IntelliSense is actually picking it up, which is what this bar that drops down with the word print. And there's a little icon beside it, and that's how you know it's a function. However, what it is missing is the round brackets. I need to have my round brackets because we're going to put variables or strings and stuff like that inside those. But for now, just follow along if you're not used to programming at all. If you're an experienced programmer, then you understand what I'm talking about already. But what I want to do is I have a couple of options. I want to print to my screen the old classic of Hello World. Now, I am going to put this in double brackets, okay, but I can actually put it in single brackets. But for this, it's better to actually put this message in. Before I run this, you can see I have this number 1 over here. And that basically means I haven't saved the file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select Control S. And you can see now that I've saved it, that number 1 has gone away. And for the moment, in order for me to run this, I'm going to go to my Run menu and I'm going to say Run without debugging. And you can see all of this stuff down at the bottom was produced and the output is right here. Hello World. It's not very pretty, is it, with all that junk all surrounding my output. Another way we can run this a little bit more clean is we can go to the top and we have Terminal. And we say New Terminal. And you can see here there's number 1 PowerShell. And it takes me to the directory where this is stored. And I'm going to type in Python and app.py. And then I'm just going to type in enter. And you can see here that it's actually outputting our Hello World. Now, one thing you can do, if you're on a Mac and you're doing this, there's one slight difference, and we're going to call it Python 3 app.py instead. So this is a good example to show you one little trick that you can do in the command line. I can actually hit the up arrow on my keyboard, and you can see that it reproduces or recreates the last inputted command. And for Mac users, you want to be Python 3 and then run it like this and then enter. Obviously, because I'm not on a Mac, I don't get that output. But you can see if I do the up arrow again and then again, it takes me to the proper one that I wanted, and I hit enter and it works. So I'm going to close the terminal and you can see that says kill terminal right here. I can do this as well, but I'm preferring to use kill terminal. And so I'm going to go back up here and I'm going to type in another line, and I'll give myself a little bit of space. So I'm going to do print, and you can see that the IntelliSense picks it up. And if I want to get to something else, I can do the up or down arrow keys. So I select print. I need my brackets, and in here, what I'm going to type is the hashtag or number sign, and I'm going to move outside of my quotations, and I'm going to say star, which is times 20. Okay. And then now what I think I'll do is I'll go back to my terminal. I'll go to new terminal, and you can see my PowerShell opens up again. Now, instead of typing in the command line that I had last time, I can just use the up arrow key, and you can see now that it actually didn't work. And the reason is because I haven't saved it. So if I can do a Control S and I'll go back to here, I'll do the up arrow again. And now you can see it's actually working. So you have Hello World and a whole series of hashtags or number signs. I'd like to emphasize one thing right now before I continue on. Your IDE or your editor or whatever you're using always works from top down. So it goes from line 1 first, it executes that, and then it'll move to line 2, then to line 3. So it always works from a top down approach for the most part. And we're going to see examples where that may not necessarily be the case. But just suffice it to say that the default is that programs always run from the top down. Before I continue, what I want to do is clean up my terminal. And I can type in clear, and that actually helps clean it all up. But for the most part, right now, I'm going to just kill that terminal. And I want to make note of one thing. So you may or may not have this option available to you. So when you see that I type in print, you get this that pops up. This may or may not actually work for you right now. And the reason is because I have already been using my Visual Studio Code, and I've also already installed a really important extension. And this extension that I've put in is going to allow me to have these things like IntelliSense and debugging and all that kind of stuff. You may at this point not actually have it. So what we're going to do is actually convert this editor now to an actual IDE, a full IDE, and that's what we're going to do right now. I've actually gone ahead and uninstalled the next package that I'm going to show you how to install. So what I want to do is go over to extensions, and I actually need to put this Python extension in here because, you know, as I stated, the goal is to convert this now from an editor over to an IDE. So I'm going to type in Python. Okay, and the one that I want is this very top one here. It's the one made by Microsoft. And the reason I want the Microsoft one is because this is Visual Studio Code is an actual Microsoft product. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the install, and you can see that that was really quick. It may or may not happen for you that fast. But the next step to this is going to be there was if I hit the uninstall, you'll see this reload required. Okay, so in yours, when you're doing this, you're going to do the installation and then you're going to hit this reload required. So I'm going to go ahead, click that button again, do the install, and it should be okay for now. In the bottom right side of your screen, you may get this error, this linter PYLINT is not installed. So we need to resolve that for you. PyLinter is a very popular linter for this. And what it's going to help you with is a lot of debugging and linking and stuff like that. But before I do that installation, I do need to go in and actually change my environment. If you look down on the bottom left of your screen, you'll see this Python, and I've got 3.7.8 on a 64-bit. You will probably have a different one. But what you need to do is I can go down and I'm going to click on that, and you can see what happens at the top. I have two versions of it right now. And so what I want to do is I want to get the most up-to-date one, which is 3.9.1. And I'm going to click on that. And you can see now that I've got this same message that you may or may not have at this point. So I've got linter PyLint is not installed. And now that we're in the new environment, we've got this message. I'm just going to simply go ahead and click the install. And you can see that it's processing the installation. You just have to give it a minute. And once it's done, then we can go ahead and I can explain how we're going to use this linter. Okay, there's a good chance you're going to get warnings, but don't worry about that for now. Okay. I've gone ahead and I've actually just cleaned up my code here, and I'm going to save that because as you can see, it hasn't been saved. All I've done is deleted everything. I highlighted it and hit the delete. So I'm going to save that file. What I want to do is just type in print, and I'm going to put my quotes, and I'm going to omit the brackets that I talked about before. So it's going to be hello world. Okay. And this does create a syntax error for us because, like I said before, I need those brackets. And if I highlight over top of it, you can see that it's giving me some information, but clearly I'm missing the two brackets. This was old legacy code that would have been accepted in Python 2. For Python 3, it's not accepted. So if I Control S this and I save it, you see that I'm getting this underline, the squiggly line underneath. It's telling me I've got an actual error. And if I highlight my cursor over top of that red line, you can see it's giving me sort of a solution to what my problem is. It's saying missing parenthesis in call to print. Do you mean print with, and it actually gives me the code or an actual other option. Okay, so that's an important thing to understand. So clearly the way that I fix this is I can actually just type in my parentheses around the message that I want to print out to the screen. And you can see over here, there is a red color on the side of the screen here. The other thing is you can see down at the bottom, it shows me I've got one error and it says I'm missing my parenthesis. So I'm getting another version here. So I clicked on that and it looks very similar to the terminal window. Okay. But if I close that out, you can still see down at the bottom that it's showing as an error. And the only way that that error is going to clear is if I now go ahead and I save it. And you can see now that switched over to 0 and the red line went away and the red color over on the right side of my screen has also disappeared. Let's try something else now. Let's just get rid of all of this. And remember before, I think what I did is I said 1 plus. Okay, and that was it. You can see I've got this little red dot here. Okay, and I haven't completed this line of code. And if I do Control S, you can see right now I am getting this little error. It's an invalid syntax. Okay, and it says peak problems or whatever, but there's no real quick fix to this because it doesn't really understand what's going on. All it sees is that there's an error. And if I go back down to my error, same sort of thing. It just says it's invalid syntax. It doesn't understand. Another way to get that error message here is you can go ahead and actually click on that like this or off, or you can go to view and down here you can select problems, and that's Control Shift M. And on a Mac, it's actually Shift Command plus M. So this is really good to have because if you have problems across multiple files or anything like that, it's actually going to help you out. This is meant to help you debug all of your code. Okay, and I can move it up and I can move it down and I can do collapsing and uncollapsing and all that kind of stuff in here. So this is a really useful window to have. But first and foremost, it tells me which file that it's in and what the problem is. Because if I had multiple files, the first thing it's going to list is which file and then what the error actually is. Okay, so that's a pretty good thing to have in here. And that's why PYLINT is a very popular linter. So I'm going to go in and actually fix my code. Okay, and I'm going to type 1 plus 1. And then I want to Control S, and you see now that my problem is disappearing. It says no problems have been detected in the workspace so far. Okay. The next thing I want to actually show you here is you go back up to View and you see this command palette. Now, if I type in lint, you can see everything that has to do with the linter. Okay, and that's because the Python package that we installed previous to this. And you can see this is all coming from this Python package here. Okay, but there's also one that I have installed for Jupyter. Okay, so anything that types or identifies the word lint or linter, it gets picked up in here. And you can see here, this has nothing to do with the linter. And what it's doing is it's actually parsing text to create the word lint. Okay, so those would be disqualified from what I would really want to do. But if I'm interested in looking for commands related to linting, I could go up into that command palette. So again, when I go to here and I do command palette, and if I type lint, and now I want to go down to here, select linter. And you can see there are a bunch of different linters available. And these are ones that are relatively popular. And, for us, what we want to do in this particular one is, make sure that we're using the current one, which is PYLINT. Okay. So just so you know, there are different linters out there, but this PYLINT is the one that we're going to stick with. That's all I want to talk about with regard to this command palette and linters. Okay. I want you to be aware there are other linters around there, but that's the one that we're going to stick with. So to conclude this video, we've covered a lot of ground. We've done all of our installations and our sort of configurations to what we want to do. In the next video, we will start to talk about formatting and running some code, some implementations, and really talk about how Python code is executed. Okay, so for now, I'm going to leave this video there, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.